Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. If a machine suddenly learns how to do your job, but generates trillions of dollars in the process, who exactly owns that money? The person who built the machine or the society that the machine just disrupted?
Yeah, I mean, that is arguably the defining economic question of our time. We aren't talking about, like, a slow, gradual shift here.
Right, not like the transition from agriculture to manufacturing.
Exactly. Well, we're looking at a potential overnight shock to the system that just completely reshapes the fundamental concept of labor and capital.
And that really brings us to the core of what we are unpacking today. We're looking closely at an article from The Economist titled How to Share AI Riches.
It's a fascinating piece.
It really is. And our mission today is to basically cut through all the heavy political noise surrounding this tech boom. We want to figure out if these widely proposed AI dividends are actually a genuine economic safety net for you, the listener, or
if they're just, a psychological parlor trick.
Yeah, exactly. A trick to keep you from getting angry about the future.
Because the stakes are incredibly high when you look at the raw numbers. There is an unprecedented, frankly, mind-boggling accumulation of wealth currently pooling around a very, very tiny group of founders and investors.
To ground this conversation and give you a sense of the scale, just look at Jensen Huang. His stake in NVIDIA, the chip maker he co-founded back in, 1993?
Yeah, 1993. It's roughly a 4% stake?
Right, 4%, which doesn't sound crazy, but today, that 4% is worth $175 billion. That is a 50-fold increase in just 7 years.
Wow.
Or look over at Anthropic, one of the leading AI labs. A recent funding round valued that entire operation at nearly $1 trillion.
$1 trillion. I mean, that single move more than doubled CEO Dario Emoto's estimated wealth overnight.
Overnight. But here is the disconnect.
Right, the public sentiment.
Yeah.
Because contrast those massive private windfalls with current public opinion, and you see the tension immediately.
The article has this crazy statistic about that.
Yeah, it points out that despite all this wealth creation happening in plain sight on the stock market, less than 1 in 3 Americans actually believe AI will make ordinary people richer.
Less than 1 in 3.
Right. So you have this massive disconnect between the fortunes being minted in Silicon Valley and the economic reality anticipated by the general public.
That tells you everything you need to know about the current mood. You might be sitting there watching this boom and wondering if you're ever going to see a single dime of it.
Which is entirely fair.
People aren't buying the trickle-down narrative for artificial intelligence. And because the public is looking at this widening chasm and getting restless, Washington basically has no choice but to react.
And understand why this political scramble is happening right now. With such urgency, we have to look at the underlying economic engine. I mean, we aren't starting from a blank slate here.
No. Wealth in America is already highly concentrated.
Exactly. The top 1% owns nearly 1/3 of all wealth. The bottom half of the country owns a mere 2.5%.
So the starting line is already drastically skewed before AI even enters the chat.
Precisely. Now, inject artificial intelligence into that existing dynamic. Historically, wealth is split between returns to labor,
the money you make from working your job.
right, and returns to capital, the money you make from owning assets, like machinery, real estate, or stocks.
Okay.
If AI substantially raises the returns to capital while pushing labor out of the equation entirely, that existing divide becomes catastrophic.
Because if we actually reach a state of superintelligence where the machines aren't just smart, but human labor across countless industries becomes completely economically redundant, the gains flow entirely to the people who own the servers and the algorithms.
That is the ultimate fear. In a future where your labor is no longer necessary to produce economic value, giving the public a direct financial stake isn't just a nice utopian idea.
It becomes a baseline requirement.
Yeah, for a functioning, stable society.
Which totally explains why we are seeing such a massive scramble for a solution, though the ideas politicians are throwing at the wall are wildly different.
Oh, completely different.
Like on June 5th, Donald Trump appeared to endorse a proposal championed by OpenAI's Sam Altman.
The voluntary contribution model.
Right. The concept here is that AI firms would voluntarily contribute a portion of their equity to a public wealth fund. The returns from this fund would eventually flow to American households.
Trump framed it as a partnership with the American public that would, quote, make 'em rich.
Make 'em rich, but cross the aisle and you find Senator Bernie Sanders proposing something distinctly not voluntary.
Not at all. He wants a one-off 50% tax on the value of AI firms.
50%.
Yeah, paid directly in stock. to give Americans what he calls a direct ownership stake.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, industry insiders like Dario Amodei are floating ideas like universal capital accounts, where the state essentially seeds investment portfolios for citizens.
The overarching theme here is this growing consensus that if AI is going to generate extraordinary wealth by vacuuming up human-created data, the public has an inherent right to a share of the upside.
That's the logic, yeah.
I am going to push back on that framing, though.
Okay, go for it.
When I look at these proposals, it feels like politicians are handing out free tickets to a casino, but the AI companies still own the house. Sure, you might win a few bucks at the slots, but the house is still extracting the real systemic wealth.
That's a really sharp analogy.
Are these ideas actually structural changes to the economy, or are they just a PR exercise? Like, are we fundamentally changing who controls the future, or are they just handing out tech-branded gift cards to keep people docile?
Well, that distinction is the entire ballgame right there. Promising to make everyone rich is an incredibly easy political talking point. Actually extracting that wealth and distributing it reveals massive structural flaws in the mechanics of both the voluntary and the forced models.
Let's get into the weeds on those mechanics, starting with Sam Altman's voluntary donation model, because the article lays out how this is practically a nightmare.
It really is. Let's say an AI company decides to just issue millions of new shares to give to a public wealth fund.
Okay.
The moment you issue new stock out of thin air, you dilute the value of all the existing shares.
It's like taking a pizza that was cut into 8 slices and suddenly cutting into 16. You have more slices, but everyone's portion is way smaller.
Exactly. And you have to consider who holds those original slices. In the case of a company like OpenAI, it's major corporate investors like Microsoft.
Are they really going to sit back and happily watch the value of their multi-billion-dollar investment evaporate through dilution just to fund a public dividend?
Probably not, without a massive legal fight. And it's not just tech giants taking the hit. As these AI labs eventually go public and list on the stock market, that dilution hits retail investors.
Meaning everyday people with a standard 401k or a basic brokerage account.
Right. It hits pension funds. The very public they are supposedly trying to help ends up paying for the donation through the back door.
Wow. The article actually highlights a brilliant paradox here. It says, quote, voluntary schemes can be meaningful or painless, not both.
Meaning if a donation is painless for the founders, they aren't transferring any real, tangible wealth.
And the ultimate irony here is that Sam Altman himself owns absolutely no founder equity in OpenAI.
Right.
He literally has no personal founder stake to donate. But let's say the government realizes the voluntary dilution model is a mess, so they decide to just buy stakes directly in these companies using public money.
That introduces an entirely different, arguably worse problem. You suddenly put taxpayers on the hook for incredible financial risk.
How so?
You're exposing public money to potential catastrophic losses at incredibly frothy, speculative valuations. Imagine the government buying into Anthropic at $1 trillion valuation using your tax dollars, only for the current generative AI bubble to pop.
Oh, I see. The public takes the massive financial hit while the early private investors have already cashed out and bought private islands.
Taxpayers absorb the downside risk. Silicon Valley keeps the upside. It's a tale as old as time.
So the voluntary or direct buy models are deeply flawed. Let's pivot to the forced approach, the Bernie Sanders model, a mandatory 50% equity transfer.
From a purely mechanical standpoint, compulsory transfer certainly raises more capital for the public without risking tax dollars up front.
But it operates essentially as expropriation, right? The state forcibly seizing private property.
Yes, and the economic ripple effects of expropriation are severe and immediate.
It's basically a declaration of war on venture capital.
Unquestionably. It immediately invites massive, years-long constitutional legal battles. But more importantly, it severely chills future innovation. If software engineers and venture capitalists know that the moment they build something truly transformative, the government will confiscate half of the underlying company.
You drastically reduce the expected rewards of success.
Right. Capital will just flee to other countries or other sectors entirely.
Yeah.
You risk killing the golden goose before it even lays an egg.
But wait, I have a major issue with how this entire debate is being framed, both by the politicians and the article itself.
What do you mean?
Everyone assumes we need some completely new mechanism to get a piece of the pie. We need sovereign wealth funds, we need mandatory equity transfers, new types of stock. But don't we already have a heavily tested mechanism for sharing corporate success?
You mean taxes?
Yes, the corporate tax rate. Why are we reinventing the wheel with these complex, legally dubious equity schemes? Why not just tax the profits when they happen? You avoid risking taxpayer money on losing bets, and you don't have to legally seize private property.
On paper, you are entirely correct. Corporate taxes are the traditional, mathematically efficient way governments share in private sector success.
So why not just use them?
Because corporate taxes fail spectacularly when it comes to multinational technology companies. Tech firms are heavily reliant on intellectual property algorithms, patents, software, which can be easily shifted to overseas tax havens. They are notoriously adept at minimizing their taxable domestic profit.
So the traditional tax net just has too many holes for something as intangible as an AI model.
Yes, and beyond the logistics, there is a massive political reality. A corporate tax goes into the vast, invisible ocean of the general federal budget. It pays for a bridge in another state or interest on the national debt.
Right.
A direct ownership stake, or a public wealth fund, makes the gains from AI highly visible to voters.
Oh, so it's branding.
It's entirely branding. It makes the voter feel like they literally own a piece of the machine. It acts as a very clear psychological insurance policy against a future where a few tech firms control everything.
Well, let's test that branding then. If we do create this highly visible, tangible American AI fund, we need to look at the math of what it actually pays out to you and me.
Let's do it.
Because the article runs the numbers on this make 'em rich promise, and the reality is pretty sobering.
Let's break down the arithmetic step by step.
Industry advocates generally talk about a range of 1 to 5% of equity being given to the public. So let's be fair and take the midpoint, 3%.
Sounds reasonable.
Suppose OpenAI and Anthropic, the two absolute titans of the space right now, gave 3% of their equity to a public fund today. At their current sky-high valuations, that seeds a fund of roughly $55 billion.
$55 billion sounds like a monumental sum of money.
It does, until you remember there are about 330 million people in America. But let's give the fund time to work. Let's project it forward.
Okay. Assume that initial $55 billion fund earns a very healthy, very optimistic 10% annual return.
Nice.
After a decade of compounding interest, that fund grows to about $140 billion. Now, if you want a public wealth fund to last in perpetuity, the standard economic rule of thumb is that you can only pay out about 4% of the total value annually.
Because if you pull out more, inflation and market dips will eventually drain the principal.
Exactly. So we take 4% of $140 billion. That gives us $5.6 billion to distribute this year.
You divide that $5.6 billion among every American.
And the annual dividend check arriving in your mailbox is just $20.
$20 a year.
Yeah.
After a decade of compounding, pulling directly from the two hottest, most valuable startup companies on the planet, you get enough money to buy one medium pizza a year.
It's honestly kind of depressing when you lay it out like that.
But let's play devil's advocate. Let's say AI really does change everything, and these current valuations are actually depthly underpriced. Let's say OpenAI and Anthropic explode in value by 20 times over the next decade.
And the government miraculously manages to avoid all the bad investments and pick only the winners.
Right. Even under those wildly optimistic, near impossible conditions, your annual payout only jumps to a few $100s a year.
The math is incredibly stubborn because the denominator, the entire population of a country, is just so massively large.
And the article points out that even if you abandon the complex equity model entirely and just institute a broad 0.2% wealth tax across all AI labs, all the chip makers like NVIDIA, and all the cloud providers like Amazon and Google,
you still only raise roughly $40 billion annually. Run that through the same population division, and you still only end up with a meager few $100s per person.
Which leads to a very stark conclusion. An AI dividend is what the article calls a nice bung, a pleasant little bonus check.
But it entirely fails the test of being a universal basic income. And it completely fails as meaningful insurance against widespread job displacement.
Right. If your accounting job gets automated, you cannot pay your mortgage or even buy a week's worth of groceries on a few $100s a year.
The financial math is undeniably brutal.
But I want to pause and hypothesize for a second, because I wonder if we are focusing too much on the literal dollar amount. What if a $20 dividend isn't really meant to replace your paycheck?
What do you mean?
What if it's about social cohesion? If you get a check from the government, even a tiny one, that says AI dividend on the memo line, you suddenly have a vested interest in the technology succeeding. You stop viewing AI purely as an enemy that's coming for your livelihood, and you start seeing it as a collective national project.
It buys public patience.
Exactly.
You're touching on the psychological benefits of feeling enfranchised in the modern economy, which are very real.
Mm.
But even if we accept that the ultimate goal is psychological buy-in rather than actual financial independence, we have to look at how the government manages and disperses those funds.
The actual mechanics of handing out the money?
Right, because the very act of holding that money introduces severe systemic risks to our democracy that could easily outweigh any psychological benefits.
Well, there is historical precedent here. The article outlines 3 international models for how a public wealth fund might actually disperse its cash. First, you have the Norwegian model, based on their massive sovereign oil fund.
And they don't hand out cash, right?
No, the returns are reinvested into the national budget to fund public services like healthcare and infrastructure.
That approach is generally favored by the political left. It reinforces the social safety net.
Second, you have the Alaska Prominent Fund model. Alaska takes the state's oil and gas revenues and pays them out as direct annual cash dividends to every resident. This is the closest real-world example to the $20 AI check we were just calculating.
Right.
And third, you have restricted savings, akin to the Trump accounts that have been proposed for children.
Oh, right, the state-seeded accounts that compound over time.
Yeah, but you can only unlock the money later in life for highly specific state-approved uses, like paying for college or funding a retirement pension.
But here's the critical warning from the text. Regardless of whether you choose public services, direct cash, or restricted savings, the underlying structure requires the government to hold massive equity stakes in private tech companies.
And that creates a terrifying conflict of interest.
Exactly. It blurs the vital line between being a market regulator and being a corporate shareholder.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the logic here. If the government is relying on OpenAI's stock price going up to pay for our public schools or to fund my annual dividend check, doesn't that mean politicians will just look the other way if OpenAI starts breaking monopoly laws?
They would be absolutely terrified of doing anything that tanks the stock.
That is the exact nightmare scenario. You are creating a perverse incentive for the state.
Right. If an AI company is engaging in deeply anti-competitive behavior or violating consumer privacy or ignoring critical safety regulations regarding superintelligence, the politicians in charge are heavily disincentivized from pursuing antitrust action.
Because imposing costly regulations would hurt the company's profit margins.
Which would lower the stock price, which would shrink the public dividend, and shrinking the public dividend angers the voters.
So the government basically becomes captured by its own investment. The regulator becomes the protector of the monopoly.
Exactly. The government might even be tempted to use its power to prop up failing, stumbling incumbent tech companies just to keep the National Wealth Fund's portfolio looking healthy on paper.
It entrenches the current winners, destroys free market competition for new startups, and entirely compromises the regulatory integrity of the state.
It's a massive systemic danger that nobody promoting these funds is talking about.
And there is another historical point the article makes about the nature of technology itself that I found absolutely fascinating. It uses an analogy regarding electricity to explain why taxing the AI foundation models might be incredibly short-sighted.
Oh, the electric utility analogy. It is a fantastic lens for this problem.
Electricity completely transformed human society. It created immense, almost incomprehensible wealth. But if a government 100 years ago had built a sovereign wealth fund specifically by taking equity in electric utilities, the companies generating the actual power, it would have been a massive dud.
So why didn't the power generation companies capture all the wealth?
Because electricity is what economists call a general-purpose technology. The utility company operates on relatively tight margins just to provide the base layer of power. The massive generational wealth didn't pool in the power plants, it flowed downstream. It was captured by the people who invented entirely new industries on top of that base layer. The wealth went to appliance manufacturers who invented the washing machine, to factories that used electricity to scale the assembly line, to the creators of radio and television.
And the parallel to artificial intelligence today is striking. Right now, everyone is obsessing over the foundational models, the underlying algorithms built by OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic.
Politicians are trying to pin a sovereign wealth fund directly to their stock prices.
Yeah. But AI foundation models might just be a utility. They might just be the base layer of electricity.
Meaning the true rents, the real immense wealth of this technological revolution, might flow somewhere entirely unexpected.
Exactly. By hyper-focusing on extracting equity from today's specific AI labs, the government might literally be betting your future on the wrong horse.
Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion of how to share AI riches. After tearing down the mechanical flaws of voluntary dilution, the economic dangers of forced expropriation, the incredibly meager math of the actual dividends, and the massive conflict of interest inherent in state capitalism, what is the safest, if least flashy, way forward?
The Economist proposes a solution that will probably put politicians to sleep, but makes total economic sense.
Lay it on me.
If we absolutely must have a public wealth fund, if the political pressure for direct public ownership becomes insurmountable, the government absolutely should not be investing in hand-picked AI winners. It should be invested in a broad equity index.
Explain how that shifts the dynamic.
Basically, instead of trying to guess which AI lab is going to be the next Google and demanding 5% of their stock, the government just buys a tiny slice of the entire global stock market. An index fund.
It is the most boring, responsible investment advice possible, scaled up to a national level.
It really is brilliant in its simplicity. And critically, the capital to fund that broad index shouldn't come from forcing specific tech founders to surrender their shares.
Right.
It should be sourced from simple, traditional taxes on corporate profits across the board or broad mandatory contributions across the entire tech economy.
By using a broad equity index, you solve multiple problems at once. You spread the financial risks so taxpayers aren't wiped out if the AI bubble bursts.
Exactly.
You completely eliminate the conflict of interest because the government isn't relying on one specific company's stock price to fund the budget, allowing them to regulate fairly.
And most importantly, you ensure that you capture the wealth wherever it flows downstream.
Right. If the wealth skips the AI labs and goes to a pharmaceutical company using AI to cure disease, the broad index fund captures that growth.
It is undeniably the safest path forward. But we cannot escape the sobering reality we calculated earlier.
The $20.
Yeah. Even with this safer, highly diversified, broad index model, the end result for you, the citizen, is still just a very modest dividend. And it's a dividend that requires years, if not decades, of compounding interest before it arrives.
A magical public wealth fund is not a silver bullet for the future of work. The real, significantly harder work of navigating the AI revolution remains completely unsolved by these proposals.
Like, how do we effectively regulate the safety of superintelligence?
Exactly. How do we build robust, meaningful retraining programs for the displaced workers who lose their livelihoods? You simply cannot solve those massive existential societal challenges by mailing everyone a $20 check.
The focus on the dividend is a distraction from the structural reforms we actually need.
And I think that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to consider as we wrap up. If the literal financial dividends of AI are destined to be this small for the average person.
If the math just doesn't support the promise of making everyone rich.
Right. Perhaps we are fighting the wrong battle entirely. Perhaps we should stop obsessing over how to artificially redistribute the stock portfolios of a few Silicon Valley billionaires.
Instead, we should start demanding that the AI itself is deployed to fundamentally lower the baseline cost of living.
Because maybe the real, tangible wealth of AI isn't in a tiny symbolic check arriving in the mail once a year. Maybe the real wealth is in a world where AI makes personalized healthcare radically cheaper, where elite education becomes universally accessible, and where housing construction becomes vastly more efficient.
A world where, even if your wages stagnate, your dollar suddenly buys 10 times as much as it used to.
Ultimately, an economy of abundance is far more transformative than an economy of meager redistribution. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.